This is LXBN TV, and I'm Colin O'Keefe. The Trayvon Martin shooting has taken the nation by storm, with new developments and then strong reaction to those developments coming almost constantly. To discuss the latest and then similarities between this prominent case and others previously, we bring in J. Scott Key, author of the excellent Georgia Criminal Appellate Law blog. Scott, it's my understanding that we now have two varying accounts of what happened. Of course, what's coming out from Trayvon Martin's family, and then what's coming from the police department there. What can you tell us about this, and then what it means for the case?
Well, I think there are some clear factual disputes on one hand. On the other hand, this case is being extensively tried in the media by people on both sides. My understanding factually is that George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch captain. That neighborhood watch in that particular neighborhood was perhaps more aggressive than what I'm accustomed to. And apparently Mr. Zimmerman went on patrols for neighborhood watch. There were some disputes involving cell phone calls that went back and forth that resulted in Mr. Zimmerman shooting Mr. Martin. There is an eyewitness account of some sort, and then there is evidence from 911 calls that tend to cut both directions. And I think there's also some evidence that Mr. Martin had called another person who reported that he was being followed. So there definitely are factual disputes. Unfortunately, there is a lot of background information about both Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin that have been leaked out that might or might not have anything to do with whether the case is prosecuted. And a lot of the evidence that's coming out, particularly Mr. Martin's school disciplinary records, wouldn't necessarily be admissible at trial if the case went to trial. While it may be informing sort of the media attention, I don't know that it's terribly helpful in terms of analyzing this as a possible case for trial.
Yeah, certainly. And then one of the most talked about issues in this case, your race aside and those types of things, is Florida's unique self-defense law, this stand your ground law. Can you explain that and then its role in this case?
So in just about any state, a person is justified in using deadly force to defend themselves. Georgia's like that. Most states have self-defense incorporated. Self-defense is something that's developed even in the common law. Florida takes self-defense a bit further in two things. One is there's no duty to retreat in Florida, so you can stand your ground. In addition to that, not only is self-defense justification that can excuse the killing of another, but a person who acts with justification in Florida is immune from arrest or prosecution and is also immune from civil liability. So in Florida, it's sort of like hyper self-defense, and the immunity part and the stand your ground part of self-defense in Florida makes it tough to make an arrest in a case like this, where the two people that would have known most what happened would be Trayvon Martin, who of course is now deceased, and Mr. Zimmerman himself, who was the person alive to give his account. So as much as there's a racial factor here, there's a lot of criticism going on about stand your ground statutes that have become more and more popular. I think 21 states have them. Georgia has a version of it, but the immunity in Georgia only comes in defense of habitation. There's not immunity in Georgia just for self-defense outside the home. So Florida is certainly among the extreme in terms of how justification is developed there.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very interesting part of this case. And then you touched on this previously, but with various leaks now coming on Trayvon's disciplinary issues at school, seemingly to rebut the anti-Zimmerman sentiment going on, this case is playing out in the media more than anything. Are there other cases that come to mind that remind you of this, where the media, almost pressures a case to move forward in a certain direction?
There are two cases that come to mind, and the most recent, of course, is the Duke Lacrosse case, where there was a DA who was actually disbarred for his actions in that case. And the DA's office crossed a lot of ethical lines, and part of what they did, or a big part of what they did, was fueled by racial politics. There was a lot of pressure to prosecute the lacrosse players with an African American victim. I don't know that those dynamics are exactly being played out here or not, because I don't know the players involved, and I don't know enough about how law enforcement works or how prosecutors work in that state. There seems to be some restraint in prosecuting, and again, I don't know what's motivating that. But one thing you fear in a case like this is that there can be a rush to prosecute based upon political pressure. And while these are all political figures, the decision to prosecute a person, particularly for something like murder, ought to come with deliberation and with a thorough investigation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and what we have here is just with all the scrutiny that's going on and with the level of attention, it seems to be moving so quickly, and people are rushing to leak information, rushing to cast judgments on that. It's just so much happening so quickly that, you have to process things is what needs to happen.
Right.
So
on the other hand,
go ahead.
The other end of the spectrum, of course, is the Bernard Goetz case from much longer ago, where you had some similar dynamics. Whether or not the person who did the shooting was a hero, and there are some people who basically are branding Mr. Zimmerman a hero, or whether or not this was vigilantism reminiscent of the Old West, and there are people that are certainly branding Mr. Zimmerman as perhaps at most charitably as overzealous and least charitably motivated by race. Mm-hmm. And so it's unclear. It's unfortunately being played out in a very ugly way in the media that may or that could influence how prosecutorial decisions are made. And that's not always the best way for prosecutorial decisions to be made.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, it's going to be fascinating to track this case going forward. It's one of those things that once the national media gets a hold of it, it just changes everything. So it's going to be interesting to watch going forward to see which direction this goes and see, we have race, we have the stand your ground law. There's so many different factors at play here that there's really no telling which way it's going to go. Well,
yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, once again, that was J. Scott Key of the Georgia Criminal Appellate Law Blog. Be sure to visit his publication. It's at georgiacriminalappellatelawblog.com. For more opinions on this story with Trayvon Martin, be sure to check out lxbn.lexblog.com. Thanks, Scott.
All right, thanks, Colin.